ready to go? So we're just going to provide a little introduction to you guys today. We looked at the U.S. Understanding the market for green tech in the United States and comparing that to Sweden whenever possible, which is actually often possible. Our agenda for this presentation, we had a lot of debate over how to define green tech. And so in a minute, I'll just present the definition that we decided to use. And then Basil's going to talk to you about GDP percentage in green tech in the United States and a little bit about Sweden as well. Will Crichton will talk to you about the U.S. energy consumption. I'll be discussing U.S. perception of green technologies and some implications with that. And lastly, Will Sanders will give some practical business examples of when green tech has been good business. So the green tech definition that we felt met our standards kind of matches with what Alex was saying. It's very broad. And I'll just read it for you. It's up on the board. Green technology is the development and application of products, equipment, and systems used to conserve the natural environment and resources, which minimize and reduces the negative impact of human activities. So now I'll turn it over to Basil.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. All right. Well, my task was to identify the amount of green tech as a percentage of GDP for the United States and to do comparison to Sweden. The U.S. economy is approximately 14.26 trillion, according to the latest World Bank data. And it's such a huge economy, it's very difficult to say what is the percentage of any particular industry in relation to the GDP. But we were able to identify two large segments, which we believe make up at least 90–95% of green tech in the United States. And those industries are very broad in interpretation. The first one is renewable energy, and we excluded nuclear energy, which nuclear energy makes up about 8% of total energy usage. But now there's some debate as whether or not it's becoming green, but because of the nuclear waste, it's not really considered renewable or green energy. Secondly, it's green construction, which covers a myriad of options and technologies, how buildings are constructed, energy usage, and we felt that was also large enough to provide relevant comparison. So as you can see, renewable energy, I was able to take the data that we were able to find and translate it into percentage of GDP. So renewable energy is, according to our calculation, 0.616% of GDP. And green construction is a little bit more, which is 0.97% of GDP. And I have the figures structured on the slides for your understanding. Now, Sweden has GDP, according to the latest World Bank data, approximately 480 billion. And we were able to find this really interesting Business Week article, which talked about the King of Sweden and how active he is, and like Swedish government in promoting green tech. And this article placed contribution to GDP of green technology in Sweden as 14 billion, which is approximately 2.9% of GDP. And we felt this example would give a really good snapshot of the differences between these countries and the emphasis on these technologies. We have Swedish flag representing Sweden, and as a percentage of GDP, it's almost 3%. And the United States, when we combine the two figures from those two sectors, is a little over 1.5%. And we could see that Sweden, even though it's like a very small country and doesn't have the resources of the United States, the focus in this area by Sweden has led it to have almost twice as much of green tech as a percentage of total gross domestic product. And in regards to historical trends, I found that, which I dealt with more in the write-up, historically, for green construction, this is an industry that's really taken off, like last 10 years, it was maybe 22 billion, which is really nothing. And now it's something like 140 billion a year in terms of green construction. Renewable energy has been a very slight change historically, primarily because the U.S. has been involved in hydropower, which for a very long time. So that's been like renewable power for quite a long time. In the future, even though Will has found some conservative data for projections in renewable energy, there are so many changes going on in the United States right now where we could have dramatic increases in green construction or renewable energy. For instance, on the Obama administration, the policy is very pro the advancement of these technologies for national security, for the environment, and for jobs. And Congress in 2009 has passed American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which puts billions of dollars in both of these areas to accelerate GDP, green technology in the U.S. economy. And as more of like a minor aside, the U.S. has developed the Advanced Research Projects Agency, Energy, which is kind of like ARPA, instead of defense, it's for energy, where they invest huge amounts of money in potentially radical technologies. So the U.S., the hope is that it would feed a revolution in technology. So the picture in the future is very murky for the U.S., and it has some catching up to do in terms of percentage speaking. So I'd like to hand it over to Will Frank. Okay.
Thank you. All right, so as you can imagine, there's a lot of data in the United States about energy consumption, right? So hopefully I picked the most important stuff that you guys can walk away with from this presentation thinking about as we roll over to Sweden. So probably the most important thing to know is that in the United States, we consume a lot more energy than we produce. And this graph is really good for illustrating that point. You can see that we have to import the difference between our consumption and production. And this is measured in, you can see that quadrillion BTUs. And BTUs are just a way of measuring energy across a variety of different fuel types. And if you're wondering what a quadrillion is, well, this is what a quadrillion is. That's a million, billion, trillion, quadrillion. So it's a lot of zeros in there, which is important to know. So as we look at the United States, I mentioned we consume 100 quadrillion BTUs and we only produce. Here's like some of what some other countries do as well. Does anybody have any guesses on whether China's a net consumer or producer? Wrong. Consumer. How about Russia? Dimitri? Net producer, net consumer? Producer, right. A lot of oil up there, over there. Japan, net consumer. India, net consumer. Saudi Arabia? Producer, yep. Sweden, any guesses? Producer. Wrong. Consumer. But you can see how much smaller they consume compared to us in quadrillion BTUs. So, looking more closely at the U.S. Energy industry, we see that we rely heavily on petroleum, which is no surprise. It's used in a variety of different sectors, including residential, and commercial, and industrial. Natural gas we use a lot in residential and commercial heating, coal, and so on. Another point to take away from this slide is that renewable energy only comprises about 7% of total U.S. energy production. I put this slide in just to basically show you that this shows what we produce and what we consume, right? So oil, you can see how much we consume and how little we produce, and that's really just the basic point of this slide, to show that there's really a lot of opportunity for tourists and other innovative companies to kind of hopefully close that gap.